Happy New Year! Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Waterstones vlog. My name is Will, and I decided for the first vlog of 2018 that I would talk to you about some of the books that I'm excited about that are coming up in the future. I admit that obviously these will conform to my reading bias. These are all authors that I have read previously in my life, and that's why I'm excited about what's coming up. Throughout the year, we'll be sort of delving beyond my usual reading taste and finding new and exciting things. But for this week, I want to tell you about a selection of books and also to talk about one of them in detail because I have already read it and it's an absolute cracker. So I'm going to talk about that one straight away. This is the book. It's called Lullaby by Leila Slimani, and this is not an author I've read before previously, actually. This is the winner of the Prix Goncourt in France, the big literary prize over there, and it is an absolutely stonking sort of literary thriller, I guess is what you could call it. That's maybe not the right word, but it's got a tagline on the front: "The baby is dead, it took only a few seconds." And that gives away, it's not a spoiler because you find out right at the beginning that this character on the front here, which as you can see with a Peter Pan collar, is a nanny of two children, and you know at the very beginning of the book that she kills these two children. And so of course the question is why? Why has she killed these children? And that is what you discover as you read through the book. I say discover, it's a really complex, wonderfully complex book, and that's why I'm calling it a literary thriller, because it's not a sort of slasher book. It's not really about sort of the procedural of how these things happen. It's about the relationship between relatively successful Parisian couple. The mother wants to return to work after having looked after her children and wants to find the right nanny to look after them. She does so, finds this woman who appears to be absolutely perfect, and indeed they have this fantastic sort of symbiotic relationship. They become very reliant on this nanny who is brilliant with the children, but then very subtly, and this is why I love this book, Leila Slimani sort of charts the very subtle power struggles and the very subtle changes in relationships and how people relate to each other, and you can see the sort of tectonic plates starting to shift underneath. And you're wondering all the time how it can possibly end with these children being killed, because it seems to be a sort of very, very slow process. That's one of the masterful things about this book. The relationships are brilliantly, brilliantly drawn, and the psychology is what makes this book completely fascinating. You have a real insight into somebody's mind. And in fact, it reminded me of books I've read in the past. There's an amazing book called Beside the Sea by Veronique Olmy, which is another book in translation from French, and that is about a mother taking her two children to the seaside, but again, underneath that there is an extraordinary psychology at play. I would heartily recommend that book, and I would definitely recommend Lullaby. It's an absolutely brilliant beginning to my reading in 2018, so do check it out. That's that one. So now, looking ahead to some of the books that will be coming up in the coming weeks and indeed months. One author who is a favourite of mine, who unfortunately died in 2017, was an American writer called Dennis Johnson. He's very famous for a collection of short stories called Jesus' Son. I was very excited to hear that there was going to be another collection of short stories coming up, and that was very swiftly followed by the very sad news of his death. So this is actually going to be, of course, his final collection of stories. This is the book. It's called The Largesse of the Sea Maiden. It has a stunning cover design by Suzanne Dean over at Vintage, who is, of course, a design genius, and it's exactly what you would expect from a story collection from Dennis Johnson. He writes about people living on the margins. He writes about total fuck-ups, frankly, but he writes about them with this incredible mixture of sort of brutality and honesty and poetry. It is sort of both brutal and beautiful at the same time. He is just an amazing short story writer. So I have devoured this over Christmas, and I just loved it. It's a real shame that he will not be writing anymore, because he writes about people that whose stories you don't usually get to hear, and that's what I really like about him. So there you go, a story collection. If you're into some short stories for this year, The Largesse of the Sea Maiden by Dennis Johnson. It's well worth your time. Moving on now to Samantha Harvey. She has a new book called The Western Wind. Samantha Harvey is an amazing writer. She is the kind of author, so when you read one of her books, you just sort of marvel from page to page at how good the writing is. And what I mean is that every word is absolutely perfect. It's not the word that you would have thought of. She has great mastery of the English language. She's a prose stylist. She has written this book, which is completely different to her previous books. Each of her books are very different, actually, but this is set in the sort of medieval period, 1491, set in a very small rural community. We have a priest as our sort of narrator figure, and it is about a man who has supposedly fallen into a river, possibly drowned, we don't know, and we need to understand how that's happened, how it relates to everybody else in this village. And what she does is she tells the story backwards, so that you start off with what you think you know, and then you kind of go backwards through the days that lead up to that moment, and you discover more and more about what has actually happened. Loved the structure, loved the writing. Did not expect to enjoy a novel set in 1491 because historical fiction is not really my thing. But of course, Samantha Harvey is far too good for me to be worried about stuff like that. So if you're looking for a really wonderful sort of historical literary novel, The Western Wind by Samantha Harvey is one to look out for. This is a proof of the only story which is the new novel from Julian Barnes. I don't really need to say much more than that. There's a new Julian Barnes novel. End of. Julian Barnes is just a brilliant writer. If you want to challenge me on that, I dare you. I think he is writing now with a sort of a confidence and an assurance, which of course comes at being at that stage in your life. This is a brilliant story about a young man having an affair with an older woman and their relationship together through sort of early 60s England. And it is a brilliant portrait of that relationship, but also of alcoholism and marriage and infidelity and English society actually in that period. Just fantastic. That's all I'm going to say. Julian Barnes, full stop. Moving on now to Their Brilliant Careers, which is published by Lightning Books, and it's by the Australian author called Ryan O'Neill. I heard about this on Twitter, and I was intrigued immediately because I believe that when it was published in Australia, it was published sort of straight, by which I mean that it appears to tell the fantastic lives of 16 extraordinary Australian writers, and many people read it as being a non-fiction book about some real people. It's not. He's made them all up. It's a novel. And it's actually a book about books. It's a book about writers. It's a book about publishing. And so that has got all my little antennae going off. That sounds like my kind of book. So I haven't read it yet. I'm intrigued. I think it will probably be very funny and very interesting. So I have my fingers crossed for Their Brilliant Careers by Ryan O'Neill. And finally, that's quite a big book. It's got a lovely big quote on the front from Margaret Atwood. The book is The Overstory, and the author is Richard Powers. Richard Powers is, I think, a vastly underrated writer. He has had some success, but he writes these big novels that are often filled with quite complex ideas. He's written about artificial intelligence. He's written books that are sort of set in various periods of time. He writes these really ambitious books because they're often structurally based on what he's writing about. There's an amazing book called The Goldbug Variations, which is seemingly about sort of the human genome and our genetic structure, but also about the nuclear bomb. I mean, it's just an amazing, amazing book. I don't know what The Overstory is about. I just know that whenever Richard Powers writes a book, I'm interested because he is really smart, really clever, and sometimes really successfully translates that into great fiction. His books are varied, actually. I think some are better than others, if I'm being fair. But I have high hopes for this because it's been a while since I've had a chance to read anything by him. So I have, again, fingers crossed for The Overstory. So there we go. There is a little preview of what's coming up in 2018. Hopefully you will be intrigued by some of those books. There'll be links in the description below so you can find them on the website. But as I said, if you're looking for something to read very soon, then Lullaby by Leila Samani is a fantastic, fantastic book, published by Faber and available, I think now. I might regret saying that, but anyway, you'll find a link below. That is all for this week. Next week, you'll be able to hear from Sian. She'll be telling you about another exciting book. Until then, take care.